Hello and welcome to Rusty Water Towers, the podcast in search of faith and hope in rural life and rural ministry. I'm your host, Dr. Jonathan Lemaster-Smith, or as folks often call me, Dr. J. Each episode of this podcast, I'll talk with a guest about their experience in rural life and ministry as we search for stories, examples, and images of creative faith and hope that I believe are latent in rural communities. Our guest today is the Reverend Teresa Whetsel, a former student of mine and a pastor in the Dakotas Conference, and we'll get to know her in just a minute. But first, we start each week off with a country music recommendation about rural life. This week, I had a strange experience. On my way to church, I'm actually serving as a pastor of a 2-point charge in Vail, North Carolina, a town you've probably never heard of. And I tend to listen to country music on my way down to center myself, instead of podcasts or the news radio I usually listen to, and on my way to church on Sunday mornings. And yesterday, I picked Hank Williams just out of the blue and put him on shuffle. And it rotated through his classics, Hey Good Lookin', Jambalaya, I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry. His son, Hank Jr., came on a couple times as part of that. But then, one of Hank Williams' gospel songs came on. It was I Saw the Light. You probably know it. Some of the lyrics go, I wandered so aimless, life filled with sin, I wouldn't let my dear Savior in. Then Jesus came like a stranger in the night. Praise the Lord, I saw the light. The song... I thought nothing of this. It's a good little song. I'd heard it before. But when I got to my first church and I opened the bulletin, I noticed in the special music for the service that day was I Saw the Light. And I thought, surely it's not the same. But it was. Not only that, did they sing the full Hank Williams version of I Saw the Light. The pianist played it from memory because the sheet music they found was not quite the same as the way Hank sang it. So they changed what they had planned on to sing it more like Hank Williams sang it. And both churches have the same pianists and choir, so we do all the same songs at both of my churches. And so I got to hear I Saw the Light 3 times that day and by three different groups, one of them being, of course, Hank Williams' original. And it made me so happy. I loved it. She played it from memory. She had it memorized. She didn't need the music. And my churches love country music. So as we look at that, I think these sort of songs are helpful for a lot of people. Often country gospel songs with messages of salvation that come from a trusted country star who we usually know their story often helps a lot in sort of that I know their story, I know what Hank Williams went through, and then yet he can sing songs about faith. It makes for a sense of companionship with the music. It's a reminder that I can like country music and still have a deep faith. I can live the life I have lived and still have a connection to the divine. This song by Hank Williams, although not initially a commercial success, became one of his most popular. He regularly closed his shows with it. This song of salvation and hope, a hope from above, whether sang by arguably one of the most important voices in country music history or by small country church choirs, reminds us that there is more to life than the despair we can easily sink into. And my hope is that we can all see the light in our communities wherever we are. And just like always, I'll add this to our Rusty Water Towers playlist on Spotify. All right, so now let's take time to get to know our guest. So welcome, Teresa, to the podcast.
Hi, glad to be here.
Yes. So what's your experience with this song?
Oh my goodness. Well, I was raised on country music, and in my family, we would often sit around the living room. My uncle played guitar, and we would sing different songs, and I Saw the Light was definitely in the rotation. As is the song I Sent.
Great.
As part of this podcast. Yeah.
Great. I ask people to send a song, music, or movie they're listening to, so Teresa has an excellent song that's in the same vein of Hank Williams, so we'll get to that later. So now that we've talked a little bit about that song, Teresa, tell us a little about yourself. I gave a little brief introduction, but I like to let my guests share more about themselves.
Well, sure. I like to say that I am a city girl living in rural America. I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, very close to Offutt Air Force Base and Strategic Air Command. So a lot of my peers at school were Air Force kids that moved in and out. But all of my extended family, my grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, all lived in rural Nebraska. So anytime we spent time with family, it was out on the farm, out in the small town, out on the ranch. And those times are definitely near and dear to my heart. And I think really helped prepare me for life in rural ministry. I definitely gained an understanding of what the rural life was all about during those formative years.
Great, great. And so now you're a pastor. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I entered the ministry as, I don't even think you'd call it second career, fourth or fifth career. I don't know. Didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up till I hit 40.
That sounds
and,
about right for most of us.
Right. And at that point, my husband and I and our three sons were living in a town of about 20,000 people. And my first appointment was to two small churches, one in a town of 700 and one in a town of 900, where agriculture is definitely the biggest industry, and very quickly had to learn the rhythms of life.
Oh, yes.
In a rural community. Yep. And since then, I served there 5 years. And then since then, I have been in central South Dakota, just about dead center of the state. The town I serve in is Miller, South Dakota. We are the county seat of an extremely large county.
Yeah.
And we have about 1,500 people. So
that's a big city.
It kind of is for out here.
Yeah. The little town I live in of Hildebrand, North Carolina, it has about 1,900, but the two churches I serve, they're actually an unincorporated Lincoln County, North Carolina, because every state, I believe, has a Lincoln County. And they are, just like you said, very agricultural, but a mix of also some teachers, nurses, those sort of things. And we get a lot more people who are starting to commute. Are you commutable to anything?
Well, the nearest bigger town is 45 minutes away.
Okay, so you could if you needed to.
And there are people who do, but the vast majority are either employed at the school or the hospital here in town, or are farmers and ranchers around.
So like many of our rural places, there's that one industry like agriculture or manufacturing, and then the rest is going to be sort of public services, whether it's medical, school, or other institutions that do those sort of things. So Teresa, thank you for being with us on the podcast. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll be back to hear some of your stories about rural life, faith, and hope. Hi there, Jonathan here, and if you're listening to this, you probably know that I like country music quite a bit. In fact, this coming Sunday, I'm using Miranda Lambert's The House That Built Me to talk about searching for the things we've lost in my sermon. That's why I'm teaching a class in country music. This course is being offered through beadisciple.com and is named Country Music and Christian Faith. It's a 3-week course that explores the connections between music, faith, and community without leaving behind the edgier parts of country music. Much of the course consists of listening to and reflecting on music that reflects the history and diversity of the country music genre. It creates a space for shaping spiritual practices and offers meaningful playlists. There will be optional gathering times, and they'll be there for listening, reflecting, and sharing part of our lives together. There will be a resource library with a mix of articles, videos, and podcasts on the history, theology, and spirituality of country music, from Alan Jackson to Zach Brown. This course begins on October 17th, 2022, is only $50, and is hosted by beadisciple.com. Check out beadisciple.com for more information. Thanks. Welcome back, Teresa. Each week we know I like to bring in people and ask them questions about their faith and life and working in the rural community. But I really want people to tell me stories, give examples about their experience. So I'm just going to open the mic up to you. I may ask some questions and clarify some things, but I want to hear about your life, your stories, and where you're finding faith and hope in rural ministry.
Well, like I said, I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. So I was a city girl. And then shortly after we were married, we moved to Minneapolis for a few years. So my experience was really urban areas. And And one of the things that I thought I really appreciated about urban life was the anonymity.
Ah, yes.
You could go to the grocery store with your sweats and no makeup on, and you're not going to see anybody you know. Now, you know as well as I, that is not how things work in small towns, in rural communities. You will always, always, always see somebody that you know.
Oh, yes.
And at first I thought, well, geez, this is like living in a fishbowl and you know, there's no privacy and there's no, but what I have come to understand is that there is a deep connection between people in these small communities, in these rural areas. There are in both of my appointments now, I have served families in the pews who are worshiping 4 generations together.
Oh, wow. That's a blessing.
Right? And you don't often see that in urban areas. People move away and move around or go to a different suburb or, you know, what have you. But in these smaller towns, in these rural communities, there is just a deep sense of family and connection that I never experienced in bigger cities.
Oh, yes, yes. I know even in my little churches, I've only been there 2 months, but every week there's this one family who a grandchild or a great-grandchild or a nephew is in town to visit them because they live out in the country and a lot of other people live in the city. So even when they're not living close, they still want to come back and be with that generational legacy that's in that community.
Yeah. And you know, these last few months I have been dealing with some health issues. And even though I'm not related, you know, I don't have those family roots here in this town, the connection from the community, the support and the love that has been poured out is just incredible. Everywhere I go, people are asking, how are you doing? How, you know, how are your treatments? How are things progressing? And, you know, where once that may have felt invasive, it feels like love now.
Yes, yes, especially because you probably get people who you may have never met, but they know who you are because you're the pastor at the Methodist Church.
Yes, exactly. Well, in the first 2 years I was here, I wore a name tag everywhere I went.
Ah, well, there you go.
Pastor Teresa, the United Methodist Church. Because when you're the new face in town,
yes,
everybody knows you're a stranger and everybody's looking at you like, who are you?
Oh, exactly. Like, why are you here? Should I open up to you? Are you suspicious? Are you here to quality control in my store?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, goodness. Yeah. Yeah. I know in my community, so I could be driving around going to any store and there's a 50% chance I'll see a church member or a relative of a church member who goes to one of the other Methodist churches in my community.
One of my first experiences with really small town and not being known, because of course in the towns where my relatives lived, people knew me. But when I got married, one of the first years we came up for, I don't remember if it was Thanksgiving or Christmas or what the holiday was, but my husband's grandmother asked me to walk down to the little grocery store and, I don't know, pick up a can of beans or something. I don't even remember what it was. And so I walked the 2 blocks down to the little corner grocery store, which had about 12 things you could buy in it. And I walk in the door and the lady behind the counter looks at me and says, "You're supposed to get an angel food cake too." Excuse me? Well, you're staying with Lester and Dee, right? Yeah, Dee just called. You're supposed to pick up an angel food cake.
That's so true. That is so true. My dad ran a convenience store for a long time. So I would get people knew to call him if they needed something because my mom also worked at the grocery store part-time. So they would go back and forth about who had what and who could do what. So it's that kind of reality. By the time you got from one place to the other, plans had changed, but you could take a call and find out.
Yep. Yeah, it's such a joy to be able to live in a place where that connection is so strong, and you see people just go out of their way for their neighbors and just really pour out the love on them. It's a beautiful thing to see.
That is wonderful. That is wonderful. As the pastor, what has been your experience in the community in terms of how have they treated you as clergy?
I was a little worried when I moved to this particular town because the Presbyterian pastor had been here for 23 years and he was a hometown boy. He was born and raised here and then accepted a call to the church.
Wow, that's intense. I don't know that I could do that.
Yeah, I don't know that I could either. And the church he was raised in, anyway. And he's a wonderful, wonderful man, fantastic pastor. But is everyone kind of going to look to him?
Is he the town pastor? Is he the
right?
He's the town spiritual leader in a lot of ways. If he's been there that long and grew up there.
Yep. And he is and was. Now he has since accepted another call, but I was really, really surprised. As skeptical as I was coming in, knowing all this information, this town really welcomed me.
Oh, good.
Matter of fact, one of the first encounters I had, I with my name tag, I was at the hardware store and was chatting with someone and said, well, I'm the new pastor at the Methodist Church. And somebody walking by stopped and said, hey, I know that church. You're the one that feeds people.
Ah, yes.
Because we have a few different feeding ministries and the mobile food pantry comes and things like that. But I thought, wow, that's quite a reputation for this church to have.
Oh, that is wonderful. It's always interesting to know what your church is known for. One of the churches my wife served, they were known as the Tomato Church because they had a big garden out front and they would give away tomato plants and they just asked that you bring back some of your tomatoes and they would cook down and have a big spaghetti supper with the homegrown tomatoes.
Wow,
and then give all the money
awesome.
they made to the local feeding ministries in the community. So it was a whole agricultural sort of very, very farm to table to mission.
That's
situation.
awesome.
Yes. These are great stories. These are reputations. I know that we oftentimes, in thinking about, reputations of our churches, how have you seen that hope in those feeding ministries and have you lived into that reputation at your church or your church?
Oh, I think we definitely have. One of the things that we do, pheasant hunting is huge around here. Huge. People fly in from all over the country to go pheasant hunting here in the fall.
You're not the first person to tell me that happens in the Dakotas.
Yeah, it's big.
Yeah.
And our church hosts a hunter's breakfast, the opening weekend of pheasant hunting. And because there are really no restaurants open for breakfast.
Oh, wow.
And so, I think you could probably get like a Subway breakfast or pick up a breakfast sandwich at the gas station or something. But, to sit down and have pancakes and eggs and, there really isn't a place for people to go. And so we've been doing this for, 10 years or more.
Oh, wow. It's in the Methodist Church, that's an establishment.
Yep. And we have groups of hunters that come back every year. There's a group of about 14 that come from Mississippi every year.
Oh, wow.
They come from all over. And so it's fun to make those connections and see those faces year after year.
Yeah.
And of course we get the locals too. But I don't know, there's something special about knowing that even when people come in from across the country, they know that we're here to serve them.
That is really neat. I like that. They sort of become your, I like to talk about things like it's bird feeders in the winter. You see them once a year, but you know that they're going to come back because they knew that you offered them something. Now, my question about the Mississippi folk is, did they ask for grits?
They did not ask for it. They've kind of teased us. And I said, you don't want any Northerners cooking grits. We wouldn't do it right.
I'm glad you know what grits are. So.
Yep. I have spent some time in the South. I do. And I know that good grits are good.
Yeah.
Bad grits are not.
Oh, no. They can easily gel up and become something strange.
Yep.
you
And
gotta
no,
know,
thank you.
You've got to know what you're doing. Maybe one year I'll fly up there and make grits for them and surprise them all.
Hey, that'd be great.
That'd be great. Have they offered you to pay you in pheasant?
They have not, thank goodness, because
do you eat pheasant?
Well, I have, and it's fine.
I've never had it. I know that we don't have a lot of pheasant down here. My dad raised them for a little bit, but I never saw the meat. They just disappeared one day. I don't know where they went. It's one of those mysteries as a child. It's like, oh, suddenly there's birds and they're gone, but we didn't eat them. I don't remember eating them, at least. So
It's very lean and can be very dry.
Oh.
And so you have to, it's one of those things, again, you got to know how to cook it.
Yeah, and you've got to have people who have generational recipes that know how to do it right. So and you also have to flavor it correctly, I'm sure, because it's a wild game.
Right. And there is a little bit of a gamey flavor to it.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
But yeah.
Good. Anything else you want to share with us?
I will have a story when we get to my song. How's that?
Oh, okay, good. So then we'll go ahead and transition to that. Thank you, Teresa, so much for being here and sharing with us about your life and your experience in rural ministry. And as I've said earlier, I ask all my guests to bring something with them that shows them where they're finding hope right now. And you have a fairly famous song for us to talk about today.
Yeah, I chose Daddy Sang Bass. And I mentioned that my family would sit around and sing songs together. And this was just such a formative part of my growing up years. Almost all of my memories of family time involve, all of us sitting around the living room, the kids, grandparents, singing songs as my uncle played his guitar.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, my uncle was is a Southern Baptist minister and served a small country church, the little white church out in the middle of nowhere with the cemetery right next door and surrounded by cornfields. And but this was a song that when we sang it, there was something about the generational nature of the song. Daddy sang bass, Mama sang tenor, me and little brother would join right in there. That was just so reminiscent of how I felt in those moments, as we all sat around together. My grandmother, who passed away when I was very young, I was like 5, I think, when she passed, she played organ.
Ooh.
And had a little electric organ in her living room. And I can remember her sitting there playing hymns.
I have seen multiple people who have these little organs recently. My grandparents had one, and then the house we moved into had one until right before we bought it. It came with the piano. This is the thing about buying rural houses. They come with things people don't want to move. So it's like, do you want a piano? We'll throw it in for free. So I'm sorry I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, that's very true. But just to show what a connection to music our family has. A few years ago, I was down visiting for a family reunion, I think. And my uncle said, "You'll never guess what we found." And I said, "Oh, what did you find?" My cousin goes into the bedroom and he comes out with a shoebox full of cassette tapes.
Oh.
And I'm like, "Oh, what's that?" And he pops one into the little tape deck, and it was my grandmother playing her organ and singing hymns. I had not heard her voice since she passed away when I was 5 years old.
Oh my gosh. That's
beautiful. It was just such a moving moment. And I think about that connection to the songs of faith and hope, like Daddy Sang Bass and I Saw the Light, and And I think about those families in my churches who are worshiping multiple generations together. And I just hope they realize what a gift it is.
And that their story continues, and they've probably been through so much in their lives, their collective life. And yet they can still be together worshiping, singing, and praising, and to hold on to those memories. Now, have you taken those tapes and digitized them or anything?
Well, I don't have them. I'm hoping my uncle or cousins have, because it's just such a treasure. And not that she was the world's greatest musician or singer.
It has nothing to do with talent or recording contracts. It's about that deep emotional connection there, that heritage that you have that you can keep and you have that hope with.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah, she was a very influential member of the family as far as faith was concerned. And so to have her singing those wonderful old hymns, is just priceless.
Oh, it's such a gift whenever you can find those little artifacts and just hold on to it, even just for that fleeting moment. And it gives you that hope to keep going. Some people are like, why do you hold on to stuff like that? Or why do you keep those things? And people are like, you're just hoarding or something like that. No, it's to hold on to memories, not to just relive the past, but to give us that strength to go forward. Because like you said, your grandmother was sort of the spiritual rock of your family. So you had that memory pushes you a little bit to keep the faith even when times get hard, because just in the past few years, I know it's been exhausting for all of us. So we need to we need to have that bag of memories we can go back into that push us forward to keep going.
Yeah, she was thinking about that push to keep going. She never learned to drive.
That's
she was
several
growing
women
up.
of that generation.
Right. And there was one Sunday, she's had, 3 little kids, and it was time to go to church. And my grandpa was busy doing something on the farm. And he was not going to leave to drive her and the kids to church. He was not much of a church goer. And grandma wasn't having it. She was all of 4'10" and was just not going to miss church. She threw those 3 kids into a grain truck and climbed up in there and started driving. I'm sure she killed that old manual stick shift 100 times between.
Oh, I can hear those noises, the gears. Oh,
the gears grinding.
But she made it. You made it to church.
Yep. Right. That was how important her worshiping community was. And how important it was for her that her children have that experience and have that community of faith around them. That there was nothing that was going to stop her.
Yes, exactly. Especially because there was nothing wrong with the grandfather. It was just, he didn't want to go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And he was busy.
He was busy. I'm busy. I'm not going to be bothered. So that reality, you know what? I'm not going to let someone else's busyness or preoccupation get in the way of me doing what I need to do.
Yeah.
Especially
and I
for
think
my
that
faith.
story, right. That story to me has really propelled me, especially when my kids were little. I lived 2 blocks from the church we attended.
Yeah.
If grandma could drive the grain truck 12 miles to her little country church.
Yes, you can get those kids 2 blocks.
I certainly can get them 2 blocks.
Yes. You made it. Doesn't matter if they're dirty or crying, they're there.
Nope. Doesn't matter if their teeth are brushed or their hair is brushed, just get them there.
And and at first you think about that and you're like, you worry if people are going to say things, but you know what? They're happy you're there. And they've all been there before. So that's that reality of it all.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Teresa. This has been a wonderful time. Thank you for being with us here on Rusty Water Towers. For those of you out there, you can listen to Rusty Water Towers wherever you get your podcasts. If you have any questions, suggestions for guest topics, or want to say hi, you can reach out to us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or you can email us at rustywatertowers@gmail.com. Now, Teresa, I want to ask where they can find you on the social media.
Oh, really, the one I'm most public on is Facebook, and I know it's getting outdated. Only old people are on Facebook anymore.
There's a good chance that'll be most of my listeners. So,
so I am at Teresa.Whetsel on Facebook.
Great. I'll put that in the show notes as well. So again, special thank you so much to Teresa for being here. I want to thank my wife, Shannon LeMaster-Smith, for recording our theme music. I record and produce this podcast because my hope is that it lifts up the hope and faith of rural life. I record using Zoom Pro, edit in Adobe Audition, design graphics via Canva and Photoshop, and distribute it via Anchor.fm. Thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you next time.
Live across the railroad tracks in a little lighthouse that you pass if you weren't trying to find me. trees are dead, there's stumps in the ground. In a great big yard across from the fire station. Oh,